And I'll just start this. Are you there? Hey.
I'm over here. I'm down here on the blue track.
Is $1 million album gonna sound better than a $606.17 album? You can pick those starter kits up at Walmart for like $100.
$100. You can have the same kind of guitar that one of these world famous guitarists are playing on stage and all around the world.
Broadcasting from Nashville, Tennessee, offering a glimpse inside the music industry, shedding light on things they don't want you to know, and exposing some of the industry's biggest secrets. You're listening to the Turned Up Podcast, presented by Real Sound Productions. Here are your hosts, Jake Jones,
oregano, paprika, garlic, onion, salt,
and Robert Venable.
Metallica. Let me just close Pinterest real quick, and then we can start the podcast.
Oh, Pinterest, yeah?
Yeah.
If I had a nickel for every time you have had to close a Pinterest tab to start this podcast.
Technically, it's Mantrist. It's Pinterest for men. It's called Mantrist.
Oh.
Yeah. I guess I should have said Mintrist. That would have even been better, I guess. Mintrist. That would have been a better pun. I didn't come up with it fast enough.
I like it.
Slow on the draw today. Dang it. How you doing, Jake?
Man, I'm doing really well.
Good. Me too.
I'm excited about this podcast. Before we ever even started the first episode of Turned Up, we had this list that still exists.
Yep, we have it.
And at the top of the list for me was this episode. And we have waited until now to put it out because...
How did we wait so long?
I don't think we intended to wait this long. I think it was, we didn't want to put it out in the very beginning.
Show all our cards.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it was like, wait a minute, we have this episode.
We never did it.
We needed to do this one.
Yeah.
I'm excited. It's because it's something that I kind of run my business by, mostly just because I'm broke, but you didn't hear that.
I heard nothing.
It's because I work in the music industry.
It's because I had my headphones off.
Oh, no, I meant...
That's why I heard nothing.
No, and I'm really excited. So the truth is, and tell me I'm wrong, Robert.
You are wrong, Robert.
No, that's
not what you wanted me to do, was it at all?
No.
I see where you're going with this.
You get what you pay for.
Sometimes you do. Sometimes you don't. My mom always used to say that something is only worth what someone will pay for it, which I think holds water. I think that's true to some extent. When we should just stop skating around this. This episode's going to be about instruments and studios and producers and albums. And does it take a lot of money to have a nice one of those? If you pay a lot of money for a good producer, are you going to get the same product as paying for a cheap producer off Craigslist? Yes or no?
Right. Is $1 million album going to sound better than a $606.17 album?
Well, we have some interesting stories about records recorded in people's parents' basements, in accounting offices, in houses by the beach, things that they've paid for the rental of and then just did it themselves, as well as instruments that are not very expensive, played by huge names in the industry. Like some of your favorite musicians might be playing the cheapest instruments out there. And you might be surprised. Even one of them, I have a fact about the name that you might see on a particular brand. The guy's last name is the name you see on that brand, and he plays one of the cheapest versions of that instrument.
Wow. Well, so, okay, first thing that comes to mind when I think of someone who has recorded or produced other people's records in crazy, cheap, unexpected places is Robert Venable.
We will talk about some stories. I've got some stories about that.
I'm excited. In fact, you have a gold record for an artist whose drums you did
in a room smaller than a bedroom. We'll talk about it. We'll get to that later.
We'll get there. But it's Robert Venable who does have gold records, Grammy nominations, Dove Awards, Best Album of the Year, Best New Artist of the Year, #1 hits on Billboard that he has written, produced. He's done everything. He's a multi-instrumentalist, drummer for the band As We Ascend. One of my favorite bands by far, for real. Great band.
I know
Love
why.
that band. Oh,
that's weird that you sing and play guitar for the same band. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Anyway. He's truly amazing, so creative. I draw so much inspiration from the work that he does, but don't tell him because I don't want him to get a big head.
I won't.
Above all else, he's my best friend in the entire world. And something I just learned about you, Robert, with all the Easter candy coming out as we approach the Easter holiday, is that you eat only the peanut butter out of the center of the little Reese's mini cups, and you leave the chocolate perfectly intact. But your method for doing that is what really blows my mind.
Right. And I wish I knew exactly how I do that. Since I'm just finding out about this like right now, I have to come up with it on the fly. What I do.
You're violating the rules of improv.
I sure am. Disclosing all my secrets of not knowing what I'm about to say. It's true. And it goes back to when I was a little kid and I didn't know that the chocolate wasn't part of the wrapper. I always thought, oh, okay, you take off the plastic piece, then you take off the other little paper wrapper that's accordion shaped at the bottom, and then you have to somehow peel off all the chocolate. Well, I got sick of that and devised a method using a fishbowl filter that, like the motor from one of those automatic filters for a fishbowl.
Okay.
Yeah. And I can't give away all my secrets, mostly because I don't know them all. And it has something to do with sticking it in the chocolate, letting it run for about 10 to 15 seconds, and then shutting it off before it clogs and you get in big trouble.
You take the little fan out and
you got to clean that off.
Peanut butter
just
out of
lick
there.
it. It's a little watery.
Oh, gross. Then you put it back in the fish tank.
And then no one knows the difference. The fish swims really fast for a good 20 minutes after that. Little remnants of chocolate and peanut butter on the thing.
The unfortunate thing is you were in your mid 90s before you even realized that that's not where peanut butter comes from. It's not harvested from the center of Reese's Cups.
Right.
It's actually its own thing and gets put into the chocolate, and that's what makes Reese's Cups special.
Yeah, my mid 290s. That was a good section of life there for a while. Yeah, that's true. Jake Jones, man, it's tough being able to describe like what we do and our accolades and our accomplishments, because you and I hang out a lot. We're best friends. We do everything together. We've had a lot of life experiences. We've traveled all over the world, literally, together with our spouses and each other in our band. But the band, by the way, As We Ascend, this is why you were, I don't know, being all weird about being your favorite band, because you're the one of the two freaking singers and guitarist for the band. A shout out to Justin Forshaw as being the other half of the frontman of our band, which is weird. We have 3 people and 2 of them are frontmen.
3 of them are frontmen now that you're going to be taking lead vocals on one of our new songs.
I have to sit back by the drums.
Yeah, well, that's fine. We can give you a microphone.
We don't need that.
We'll give you like a Backstreet Boys mic, like a head mic.
Like a Phil Collins mic?
Like
a headset?
Yeah.
That'd be great. Can I have a little fuzzball at the end of it?
A big one.
A big one for a wind filter?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't want to get those plosives.
It's going to look like a bunny tail in front of my face?
Absolutely.
This is going to be great. When I start sweating and just turns soggy and it's dripping wet like an old washcloth.
You're spitting on
Just sneezing while I'm playing drums. I don't know that I've ever sneezed while playing drums. It's interesting. We're not talking about me. We're talking about you. So have you ever sneezed while singing? Like
No,
or playing guitar? Like
but I burp.
like while you're singing?
Yeah.
I haven't even noticed that.
Oh, well, I try not to, and I try to cover it up, or sometimes
You guys sing!
It's just for real, sometimes you hit a note and it's like, oh, crap.
Before you were the singer for As We Ascend, you were freaking ridiculous guitar player sharing the stage with all these huge bands. I'm in the band, We As Human, Freudian slip. We As Human, touring all over the world, all the coolest venues. Red Rocks is probably my favorite venue in the whole world, and you got to play it twice,
yeah.
That's so ridiculous. And I've heard all your stories about being on the road and everything.
Red Rocks is one of the most awkward venues to play.
Why?
Because you're so far down, and the seating is just stone. it's
which
seats,
is cool,
but it's the side of a mountain. So you're looking
upward.
up at, the further back you look, the further up you look. But the front row is still higher than head level.
Eye level?
Yeah, it's weird.
That is weird. But it's a cool venue to see. Like, that's a very cool setting to see any of your favorite bands or any band in general. And to be the band playing that stage is a huge honor, and you've done it twice.
Absolutely.
Jeez, man. And then, so you've also are a songwriter with Strollsville Music. Shout out to Chad Green. You are an award-winning, top of the charts, Billboard #1 songwriter, producer, mixer, musician, also Rock Band of the Year, Best New Artist, all the things. Oh, runner-up for iHeart Podcast Music of the Year, iHeart Radio Podcast Music Podcast of the Year. Woo! Runner-up. That's a whole sentence just for an accolade.
Turned up, man. We did it. That's a big accomplishment.
You and I, we made something. And you've got this ridiculous recording studio, Incendium Sound, that we're sitting in right now in Tennessee, just south of Nashville. Country Music City. But you don't really do much country. We write a little bit of country.
Yeah, we wrote a smash country hit this week.
We did. Shout out to Luke from Canada.
Luke Nielsen.
Hey, Luke from Canada. I'm just going to call him that the whole time, though. But something that we haven't talked about on the show, and I've been reluctant to say anything about because I didn't want the word to get out that you actually knew this information, that you were privy to such classified info. Jake is one of only 3 people to know the secret recipe, all 11 secret herbs and spices to KFC's ingredients, to their spicy, their chicken, their grilled, not even grilled chicken, their fried chicken. KFC,
chicken, yep. Original recipe.
Fried chicken, all 11 herbs and spices. Go ahead and name 5 of them.
Oregano.
Interesting.
Paprika.
Saw that coming.
Garlic.
Okay.
Onion.
Ooh, what a twist there at the end.
Salt.
Oh.
5.
That is 5. And you're going to leave the other 6 up to our imagination, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, go ahead and name them. His eyes just like, I don't even know if I know 11 herbs and spices.
Rosemary.
Smarties.
Yeah, I'm done.
Reese's peanut butter. Man, I wonder. So when I was little, my grandma gave me a book. Said I think it was called like "What in the World" or something like that, which had all sorts of like world records and cool did you know facts and stuff about everything in the world because the internet wasn't a thing yet, really. And it was a book like I guess 1.5 inches thick, but like a full 12 inches by 10 inches, like a huge book, not like a little pocket-sized book. And so many just like world records and like look at this lady with like a 13-inch long neck and look at this guy with fingernails that touch his toes. And but the part that intrigued me was one of the people who had the original recipe to like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or something like that, which was highly guarded. His last name was Venable. I'm like,
wait a minute.
I am heir to the throne to have the recipe to this soft drink. And I was always like, I used to tell people in school.
What's the recipe?
Oh, I don't know. It didn't say what it was.
Well, but you should know now.
I haven't received that information yet.
You've been around for hundreds of years.
I think they mailed it to me in the future and I haven't received it yet. I don't know how they know where I'm going to be. Did you ever do any of those like mail yourself things? Like there used to be websites that like send yourself an email in 10 years. What would you want to tell yourself? And you could like type it in and then in 10 years it would email you at that address. I never got any of them. I don't know where they all are, but I did them.
Well, okay. So the church that I went to when I first moved here does a lot of that kind of stuff. And
it's like a time capsule.
Like years later.
But not.
You get that. I just last year got a card I had written to myself.
For real?
Yeah.
Like a physical one?
2011, yep.
A tangible card you wrote yourself?
Mm-hmm.
How did it get to you?
They mailed it to me.
Like you've lived in the same address for however many years?
No, but either it was forwarded or they found it or...
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I still talk to some of those people. I don't, I know they have my address. Send me a birthday card this year. So.
They just keep you updated in the system.
I guess, yeah.
I guess you don't church jump as much as I do.
It is the second church, or it was the first of 2 churches that I've been to since moving here.
We've been to the same one for the last 10 years, but we church shopped for a good 6 months before that. And we're church shopping again now. Just
church shopping. What an interesting expression.
It is. But I mean, you have to find the right one.
Do you shop organic, non-GMO? Do you try to shop?
I'm 100% just
deep fried.
Wreck my life. Yes, please. I want you to tear it up. Get in there to the bone.
All the preservatives.
If it tastes good, it is good. Yeah, make it. Wreck me with it.
You know what? If it sounds good, it is good. That's a mantra that I live by.
That's a mantra I've lived by since 2003, and I think that's going to stick true to what we're talking about today. Because some things cost a lot of money and some things don't. But if it sounds good at the end of the day, does it really matter?
Not one stinking bit.
You know, a question I'm asked a lot as a producer is, I guess it's a statement. And they're more concerned like, hey, I've only got this $200 guitar. Is that going to be okay? Or should we borrow one of yours? Or should I rent one? I'm like, it doesn't matter. What's it sound like? And like, I don't know, guitar. I'm like, well, does it stay in tune? Because even the most expensive guitars I've ever recorded, I tell them to tune after every single take. Is it intonated properly? Do you know how to play it? Do you know what you're playing through? If you can make it sound good at your house, bring it on. Let's go. Let's see what we can do with it. If you're happy with it, let's do it. If you're not happy with it, we'll work our way around it. But it doesn't mean that your $200 guitar, your like $50 first act guitar that you can get at Target, it doesn't mean that it's not going to sound good. And I can tell you stories about that in just a minute.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And, and again, I'll have some stories as well about just using cheap, cheap has certain connotations. So I should say inexpensive
Yeah, that's a good way.
gear on stage in the studio. And it's, I don't know, it just blows my mind kind of thinking back. The more research, not only just for this podcast, but just the more research into our field that I've done, you kind of learn that as a new piece of technology comes around, it's first rejected, then it's embraced, then it's rejected again. And with that rejection comes, it's no good. It pushes the price of it down, so it becomes less expensive.
Right.
And you realize, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, this was the greatest thing that ever existed.
Right.
I think solid state amplifiers for rock and roll are a fantastic example of that. Solid state meaning not using tubes, vacuum tubes.
It's straight up just going through, it's electricity going through wires rather than hitting those tubes and quote unquote warming up the sound or amplifying it through, I guess there's a whole science behind it. But yeah, no tubes involved. Let's just say that.
So when the non-tube amps came around, it was just the coolest thing because tube amps are expensive, they're bulky, their parts are expensive. They have to be, the tubes have to be replaced like a light bulb. I mean, they kind of look like little light bulbs. And over time they go out, they go bad. They're sensitive to heat and cold and moisture and
other electricity being nearby.
Everything.
Yeah.
They're just a pain to upkeep. And whereas solid state amplifiers, my very first amplifier is still in my basement right now and still works. And I've never done anything other than plug it in and use it. I don't have to replace anything on it. Nothing's going bad. So there are definitely advantages, but you ask, the average muso, someone in the music industry or big, hardcore fan of gear or whatever, and they're just going to tell you solid state amplifiers are a joke, that they're terrible and that they sound bad because that's what everybody else says.
But that wasn't always the case. For a while there, everybody loved the solid state technology, and that was on a lot of the hugest records we've listened to, and like the big rock records. I keep slamming my hand in this microphone stand. So if you hear big booms, that's me. But that was a sound that people craved and a sound that people wanted to get. And I actually have a story of someone bringing in a solid state, a small little combo.
Okay, wait. Okay, before we go there, I just want to. I want to go over. So I was having fun while I was sitting on the toilet doing my research because that's where I brain the best.
We have side by side.
My office
is great. Yeah.
Pass our papers under the door. Just kidding. There's no door. So something I kind of stumbled across. There's lots of these lists that you can find, but they're full of really great information. Some of this I kind of knew, and some of this I didn't realize. But it doesn't necessarily cost a lot to make a good record. And there are some examples throughout history that prove this. And so I've only got a couple here, a few.
Yeah.
So let's go back to 1988. That is the year Jake Jones was born.
That was not the year that Robert Venable was born.
This band that I don't even know if it had a name yet, had their singer had written a bunch of songs, 12 to be exact. And he went into this little studio. It's a little triangle-shaped studio. I can't remember the name of it.
I can't either.
And they had a house producer there who charged them $150, and they set up. I think they could only do, they only had 6 hours, I think, that they could spare because they had a show that night. And they recorded 11 and a half demos. It was $30 for a reel of tape, and because they were tracking the tape, and they ran out of that first reel midway through that 12th song. And they didn't have $30 more to spend on another reel. So that engineer took those demos and sent them off to this brand new company they were a record label, but they hadn't quite gotten up and started yet. That label was called Sub Pop, and they were in Seattle, and they really liked these demos. And so they got back to the band. The band had given themselves a name by then. That name is Nirvana. And their singer, who is Kurt Cobain, was Kurt Cobain. Well, the singer of Nirvana will always be Kurt Cobain.
I guess you're right.
Went in and they tracked their first record. The album is called Bleach, and that was in 1988. and they paid a total of $606.17. Fun fact, I don't remember who he was to them, but a friend of theirs actually paid the $600 to record that record. And so he is credited on the album as being the guitarist, even though he didn't play guitar on the record. They just wanted to give him some credit for having paid for it all.
Interesting.
But yeah, they loaded in their cheap amps and their cheap guitars and their cheap basses and their cheap drums. And the producer, reflecting back on those sessions, just said how blown away he was, because it didn't matter that their stuff was cheap. It didn't matter that they recorded everything so quickly that it only cost them $600 to do the album. They had practiced so hard, and Kurt was so serious about what they were doing that when they got in, they nailed the parts. They played them all at the same time so they could get in there, get it done, and get out.
Right.
And it took them no time to make it. And the album sold 30,000 copies on its own, and then has since gone back and, after the album Nevermind came out, their big one, and gone multi-platinum.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, I love that story.
So fun fact about Nirvana, you're talking about their band name. They're actually known before Nirvana. Their first band name was Skid Row, Fecal Matter, and Ted, Ed, Fred. That was their first few band names. And then,
I was about to say, was that all one name?
No. Skid Row. Interesting, right? But then they went to Nirvana, and then they had a lawsuit against them by a Brit band, the same name, that started in 1965, 2 years before Kurt Cobain was even born.
Oh, wow.
And then they eventually reached a settlement in court, and the British Nirvana, seized on the opportunity, though, releasing a tongue-in-cheek psychedelic cover of Nirvana's hit "Come As You Are," which is kind of funny. So, yeah. Anyway, that was a little fun fact for you on the band name Nirvana before they came around. But you were talking about Nirvana, and it reminded me of Beck. And I kind of lumped them together because a lot of my friends who listened to a lot of Nirvana were also Beck heads and listened to a lot of the stuff like their album Odelay.
It wasn't until last year that I realized their big hit "Loser," which came out in '94.
I'm a loser, baby.
That the first lines of that chorus are Spanish for "I'm a loser." Is it "I'm a loser, baby"?
Soy, which is I am. Un, which is a. What
Sounds like you're saying
petador or something.
Yeah,
I always just kind of gloss over that one. All our Spanish-speaking listeners need to correct us because we are horrible researchers.
Don't you hate me or kill me?
Kill me. Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, I didn't know that was. He was just singing Spanish. I'm a loser, and then he sings it in English.
Yeah. So 1996, the Odelay record that they did.
Trying to follow up that big hit, so he wasn't a one-hit wonder.
Yeah, ridiculously cheap recording equipment. The stuff that you could pick up anywhere. I don't know, probably not the stuff you have to order online these days and find on eBay that's all vintage and Tubi and all the things that everybody wants, all the buzzwords, warm analog gear.
Well, and this was 96, so computer recording was still pretty new.
It was still around. Yeah, I was doing things.
But he was working with a pair of producers, and they went by, was it the Dust Brothers?
Yeah, yep.
The Dust Brothers, yeah. I know he was really excited to work with those guys for that record. And they were known for, ripping off samples from other albums, and laws were really kind of clamping down around that time. Just some fun facts to interject.
Yeah, they did a lot of Beastie Boys stuff, and also Mbop for Hanson.
Shut up.
They're songwriters. They did a lot of stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Anyway, they were working with the band, and they were using Pro Tools, which is what I use. You use Cubase. It's just a different DAW, or digital audio workstation, the software that we use to record the stuff. We don't go to tape anymore. Some people do. We don't. We go to ones and zeros on a hard drive. Anyway, I go there via Pro Tools, same way the Dust Brothers did and Beck on this record. And the version of Pro Tools they were using in the computer hardware they had to run the software on at the time was so freaking slow. And I can relate to this sometimes, just being a man of impatience. I have ideas and I want to get them out, and sometimes I have to wait on the computer. While they're waiting for things to render and things to load and plugins to do their thing and whatever they were waiting on, they're so slow. They were writing new parts and already had ideas, and were finding samples and listening to other music on vinyl and cassettes and trying to find samples they're going to rip and stuff like that, because they had all the time in the world while they're waiting on the Pro Tools little spinning wheel of death to go Gonna get there. Gonna get there.
Well, and something that the Dust Brothers were known for was their vast record collection, which they would use, of course, to rip a lot of those samples off. I took us all. I was like, let's listen to an entire record. Oh yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff on this record. We can use that for
if you were gonna
another song.
Render anything.
Done saving yet?
Pro Tools, yeah. You hit save or you hit render or bounce to disk. It just took forever. And so I remember even when I was getting started on Pro Tools, 99, I think was the first time, you hit save or render and you can go make yourself a sandwich, drive around the block, come back and see if it's about halfway done yet. It took time. And these days we're doing offline bouncing, which means it's not in real time. It doesn't mean it means a 4-minute song's not going to take 4 minutes to bounce. It's going to take, or render, I guess, for people who don't do music. You can do it in like 20 seconds.
Yeah,
which is great.
Takes all those tracks and smushes them into that final audio file that you're going to hear on iTunes Music, because we don't use Spotify anymore.
Oh yeah, death to Spotify. Put me down on the con section of that, not pro.
So let's fast forward to another massively successful album, or actually I think it might have been an EP.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
I remember when that first song hit the charts, though. It debuted at like number 59 or something like that on the top 100. But it hit the Billboard top 100 really quickly, though.
It became one of the biggest songs of that entire year, 2009. Anybody want to guess what it is? All right, you right there, sitting in your car. What song is it?
Louder, please.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Yeah,
whatever.
Just yell it. Yell at the car next to you. Just yell, Fireflies. Is that what it's called?
Well, that was the name of the song, yeah. By Owl City. The album was Of June, is what it was called.
That's right. I forgot now.
So this entire album was recorded in his parents' basement and then uploaded to MySpace.
That was the thing to do at the time.
Which is where it was discovered.
Adam Young was the guy, the man behind the name Owl City. Living in Minnesota, in his parents' basement. And he was working for Coca-Cola in the warehouse, moving boxes on and off trucks and from one section of the warehouse to the other. And he was like, man, I'm making music. Screw this.
And just like that, one of the hottest songs of the entire year. And didn't have to save up for 1,000 years to buy that really nice, expensive microphone or that really awesome console.
Or save up a second mortgage worth of savings to go to a famed named producer somewhere in the world, and travel expenses and a hotel and studio rental and then editing and mixing and mastering. He recorded that stuff himself down in the lower basement of his parents' house in Minnesota.
So there's basements and then there's garages, right?
Huge difference.
The term garage band has been around forever, and there's video games named after it. There's recording software named after it.
Right.
When you think of garage bands, you think of what?
I think of like just getting started. Let's get the guys together. We're going to be just, kind of hit around on things, out-of-tune guitars, loud, for like 45 minutes on a Thursday afternoon.
In a garage.
Really sweaty, really loud and echoey.
No shirts allowed because it's too hot.
Maybe like a can of beer over there on the amp or something. I don't know. Like I just picture like something from the 70s.
Actually, I have pictures from when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and my stepdad and his brother and their friend out in the garage, big PV stack speakers,
my picture
drums without resonant heads on them, and I think it's like an acoustic electric plugged into an amplifier. No shirts allowed.
Like the big wall of amp in the beginning of Back to the Future.
Yes.
Where Marty goes over and plugs it into this huge wall of speakers. And but like I tried playing drums once in a garage.
And then he writes a song that he teaches to Chuck Berry.
That's right. Changed the course history. Man, I can't play. Yeah, I never did the garage band thing. I played in a ska band once. We tried practicing in the garage. It was just so loud.
I did the garage band thing. Well, let's talk about one of the most famous garage bands that there ever was and ever will be.
Okay.
The Foo Fighters.
Not Carly Rae Jepsen. Yeah,
Again with the Carly Rae Jepsen.
She never tweeted me.
Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna tweet her right now while you talk about this next section. Go ahead.
All right, well, you keep going
talk
for
about
it.
the Foo Fighters, and I'm gonna tweet Carly Rae Jepsen.
Foo Fighters 2011, Dave Grohl wanted to take it back to their roots. I think garage banding especially was huge in the 90s because we didn't really have the ability just the equipment wasn't readily available to be a quiet practice band. Bands had real drums, period, the end. That's what you did, and you had to bang them loud. So to hear over it, you had to sing into a PA system with guitars turned all the way up. And you definitely weren't going to be a rock band with a little combo amp. You had to have the separate head with the big, massive cabinet and all. Anyway, so in 2011, the Foo Fighters recorded Wasting Light. The entire album was recorded in Dave's garage, right?
Okay.
Now, that doesn't come as the biggest surprise in the entire world. Foo Fighters are kind of known for throwing up the big FU to everybody and saying we're going to do things our own way, which is as rock and roll as it gets. But what I find really fascinating is let's think about all of the amazing things that the Foo Fighters have done over the years. Dave Grohl being the former drummer for Nirvana, for anyone who doesn't know, and lead singer and founding member of the Foo Fighters.
Right.
But what surprises me about this record that was recorded in Dave's garage is that it was their first #1 Billboard album.
That's interesting.
Yeah. First album to go #1.
Done in the garage. And have you ever seen his documentary, Dave Grohl's, called Sound City, where he talks all about like the analog recording gear, all the things we were just talking about a second ago, the expensive gear. He had it all eventually, but that's interesting that he hit #1 first.
If I recall, he even wound up with the console out of Sound City, right?
He did, yeah.
Is that him? Yeah.
Yeah, he took that home.
Bought it.
Probably in his garage. It's funny that you talk about studio, like recordings done in garages, because a lot of times now studios are in garages, at least in Nashville. Like that's a thing. There are 500 recording studios in a little suburb of Nashville called Berry Hill, and they're all in little houses.
Yep.
And there might be 5 or 6 really big, nice studios that you see like in the movies and TV show like Nashville. But that's not where the majority of these records you're hearing are coming from. And that's a little fun fact. Yeah.
It's so true. Now, let's talk for a second about the instruments that are on these recordings or are on stage in front of thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Well, if we're seeing musicians on stage in front of thousands and thousands and thousands of people, they are probably playing instruments worth thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because they can afford it. And obviously, more money on an instrument means better sound, right? Because these people are probably playing $10,000 guitars because they sound better. I mean, I could do that too, but why are we doing this? Oh, I get it. You're laughing. It's true, and but not. More expensive instruments does not necessarily mean that they sound better, and often cases I've noticed in personal experience they don't.
Yeah, I was just having this discussion actually with my next door neighbor.
Interesting.
So they're wanting to buy their son an acoustic guitar, and they're looking all around, and they want to get him something good, but if he decides he's not interested anymore, they don't want to spend a fortune on it. And they're concerned about getting him something too cheap because it might not be good. And with acoustic guitars in particular, man, I have played $20,000 acoustics that sounded like strings wound over a garbage can.
Those are my favorite acoustics.
No,
so you're saying they sound great, huh?
No, they're terrible.
Oh, yeah, I'm new though.
You're totally missing the point.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. But there have been cheap ones that you and I have both owned before,
or currently,
that should just be called garbage. Maybe in some cases that sound ridiculously amazing.
Yeah,
like ridiculously amazing. And it differs. You can't just go buy the same quote unquote garbage guitar and hope it sounds the same, because it won't. Every guitar made is different because of the age of the wood, how it's put together, maybe the way it's seated or glued, the humidity, the conditions it's been kept in, the kinds of strings on it.
Quality of the wood.
In anything, it has to do with the way it sounds. And And one thing that people look for is where it's made. And I don't know the validity, and maybe you can help me out with this, of like there are guitars, for instance, we're on that example, made in America, made in Mexico, made in Japan. And some people are like, oh, I was going to pay you that for that, but it's made in Mexico instead of made in America. I'm like, well, I can't personally, as a producer, hear a big difference between those two.
Oh, right.
Do you? You're a guitarist.
Not usually. I mean, it all depends on what type of guitar, what sound you're looking for. I mean, right there on my wall is a Fender Stratocaster made in Mexico.
Right.
But I swapped the pickups out in it for a very specific type of Stevie Ray Vaughan blues pickups. I think those happen to be made in America, but that's not what I was looking for. I knew that I wanted that sound. But I know that guitar plays amazing. I know that it's on all kinds of records. I know that you're not going to hear, you're going to hear a difference between that guitar and another one just like it that has nothing to do with where it was made or the quality of the wood. It's going to come down to every instrument sounds just a little different.
That's true.
Because of lots of factors. But, with electric guitar, I think the pickups have more to do with the difference in sound. Whereas I have an Epiphone, Les Paul, which was made, I believe, in Japan.
Now, are Epiphones the lower end? I don't know, entry level, not even entry level, but like the lower priced version of or is that a style? Like the Les Paul.
It's priced. So Epiphone was its own company that was eventually purchased by Gibson.
Okay, yeah.
And so then what Gibson, I believe there are still some Epiphones that you can buy that they make that are just an Epiphone. But for the most part, the Epiphone is the less expensive version of something Gibson.
Okay.
You can buy
like the Fender Squier. Like the Squier is the cheaper version of the Stratocaster or whatever.
That's a great example. And different companies, their, air quotes, cheaper or less expensive versions may be better or worse than other companies' less expensive versions.
Okay, gotcha. So the Epiphone might not be exactly equal to a Squier, like as far as the ratio of price difference or whatever,
right?
Of quality. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm with you. So I know on Craigslist, a quick search for like a Stratocaster, Fender Stratocaster. If you look for a Squier, you can find them for like $100. And then you can find like a made in Mexico Stratocaster for like $400, but a made in America Stratocaster for like $1,000.
I was going to say $1,400. Yeah.
Yeah. $1,600 is one here, just scrolling through, all based off of where they're made. So I personally do not hear a difference, a big difference. I mean, again, like you said, there's going to be little subtle differences from even the same thing from one to the other, just based off of the wood and the conditions. But the made in Mexico, made in America one, I don't hear a big difference, not $1,000 difference.
Right. And there's going to be little differences as far as, on the American version, we used metal for this thing instead of plastic.
Sure. Okay.
Or little things like that. So
real bone or ivory instead of plastic inlays or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of that I'm sure is just marketing, branding. They want to make sure that you can immediately identify an American version versus a Mexican version.
Gotcha.
If we're talking about Stratocaster. I can, looking at my Les Paul, my Epiphone, unless you look at the headstock, so the part at the very end.
Yeah.
It has the basically the corners cut off. And that's the difference between an Epiphone and a Gibson.
Never noticed that.
And then it also says Epiphone on it, not Gibson.
But you can wipe that off.
Everything else looks exactly the same. And it's heavy like a normal Gibson. It's got that great sustain. The build is the same. The pickups, not quite as good.
But you can change those out.
Yeah, those can be changed.
Okay.
And they're fairly inexpensive to do. A lot of times when you tour, your guitars get beat up really bad. And they're going to get dents and scratches. And ultimately, if you have a $5,000-$10,000 guitar, you're going to, that's going to lose a lot of value very quickly from just touring. So sometimes you use a cheaper guitar. or a cheaper, less expensive instrument on tour. So that way
That makes sense.
it gets beat up or dropped or whatever,
Or smashed on the last song of a show.
or smashed at the last song of a show.
Conveniently right after the guitar tech brings you a new guitar right before the last song that's slightly different than the other guitars you played the whole show.
Yeah.
And then you just smash it. That's weird.
Are you going? Because I have a story about this.
I don't have a story. I've seen it done lots of times where I can tell, like, they just gave him a smash guitar. I can tell they just switched out the $2,000 guitar that he has an endorsement deal with for, like, the little Squire.
Yeah.
That they just brought out that's slightly out of tune the whole song.
Right.
He's about to smash that guitar. I've pointed that out to people I've been at concerts. I guarantee you he's about to smash that guitar.
I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, one of our first big tours with We As Human that we ever did, one of the bands we were on tour with, it cost them $99 through their artist discount to purchase a guitar. So they bought one for every show. And last song brought it out. It stayed in tune for about 3 seconds. The rest of the song sounded like garbage. In fact, I don't even think he really tried to play it that much. And then end of the song, smashed it to bits and pieces on the stage and threw the parts out to the fans.
That's like a lawsuit waiting to happen. Throwing shards of
Right.
wood and metal and plastic out into a crowd.
Maybe he handed them off. I don't know.
Real quick before we move on, let's just touch on knockoffs, because I see online these days, internet buying, I'm purchasing things, shopping for, you want that look, you want it to look good on Instagram. You don't really care what it sounds like. What about these knockoffs? Like on AliExpress, which is a website you can buy things directly from China. They make, if you search cleverly enough, you can find knockoffs of these Gibson Les Pauls and these Fender Stratocasters and these gold tops and whatever they may be. If you just kind of search for words that are similar to those and find them for like $150 shipped rather than, $1,500, $2,000.
Well, and China doesn't adhere to the same copyright trademark laws as the rest of the world.
Right.
Which is why in China, street vendors will have DVDs of movies that are just now coming out to theaters.
And
you can get
Gucci.
Yeah, you're right.
And like Louis Vuitton purses and bags that are like, this is $80.
Yeah, I was going to say lots of really funny, just the butt of a lot of funny jokes.
Right.
Because they always have some sort of bizarre, slight misspelling.
Misspelling
of the name.
is right.
I actually bought a Gibson Les Paul knockoff that I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was buying. It was eBay. And there was one for $600, Gibson Les Paul, beautiful curly maple top with this cool dragon inlay on the fretboard. Looked amazing. Now, today I would look at that and know immediately it was a knockoff, just because I know that Gibson doesn't, nor have they ever made a guitar like that, ever. But at the time, I was a teenager and thought, this is awesome. Bought it, got it, and you could tell it was cheap. And some of the things that do separate less expensive from more expensive instruments are the way they're built, not necessarily where, but the frets. If you're trying to play something and the frets are stabbing you in the hand, that's a problem. But if it's supposed to be a Gibson and that's happening, well, that's an even bigger problem. And then if you plug it in, it sounds like garbage. That's the biggest problem.
Right.
But the thing is, there are musicians, very famous musicians, that have been known to play knockoffs or played a knockoff for a long time and didn't realize it until eventually one day they did. And there's even knockoffs that are famous and worth more than the originals because they're so well known for being a knockoff that they're rare and sought after.
There was even a lawsuit toward the company, the Takamine lawsuit era, which is where they used to clone a whole bunch of like Martin and Gibson guitars.
And Takamini's a guitar manufacturer.
Yeah, and they're still around, I think. Mm-hmm. And they made a whole bunch of guitars in the late 70s, early 80s that blatantly ripped off the visual stylization and audible stylization of a whole bunch of really popular, expensive guitars. And I had one for a while. I think, have you had a Takamine lawsuit guitar?
No, I've never owned one.
Our buddy Josh Gleave, we did a co-write with.
That's right, yeah.
He had a couple. But they sound great. And for knockoffs, I mean, dang. One of the best sounding recorded acoustics I've ever heard.
Right, and a lot cheaper.
Oh, well, a lot cheaper.
And that's, that was the biggest reason for the lawsuit, was these companies were losing business to the Takamine, who was making an exact replica of their guitar that sounded just as good, and if not in some cases better, and for way less money.
And so to restate the original question, does the amount of money you pour into an instrument really make a difference in the sound quality? Well, let's look at some very popular musicians who happen to be playing very, inexpensive versions of instruments. Like before we started this podcast, we were talking about the Wooten brothers. Victor Wooten, a really popular, well-known bass player.
Prolific, yeah.
And his brother, Reggie Wooten. Reggie plays a Fender Squier, like a Squier guitar.
You can pick those starter kits up at Walmart for like $100.
$100. You can have the same kind of guitar that one of these world-famous guitarists are playing on stage and all around the world.
So My Chemical Romance.
I like that band.
Epiphone Les Paul.
So Epiphone's the cheaper version, right?
The cheaper version. I picked mine up. I think I got mine from a thrifty nickel, if you have those where you live.
And
for $150.
And other Epiphone notable users would be like Bob Marley, huge reggae singer, I guess. Rest in peace, man. Dixie Chicks and Twisted Sister. John Lee Hooker used a couple of Epiphone hollow bodies.
Now, John Lee Hooker, those might have been before Gibson bought Epiphone.
Maybe.
So
that was
been
a while ago.
The actual, like the Epiphones.
But they're still not as expensive as, at the time.
No, clearly the company went under and Gibson saved them.
Yeah, but these are people who could afford more expensive instruments. So obviously they had trust in the way it sounded and felt and played and everything.
Yeah.
Chad Kroeger, name that band.
Look at this graph.
That's my favorite parody of that song. Nickelback, as well as his Gibsons, uses some Epiphone Elitist LPs and Elitist SG and one regular Epiphone LP, which are different models of
LP being Les Paul.
Yeah.
Ace Frehley from Kiss had an Epiphone signature Les Paul that he used for most of the shows until the last couple of years where he went back to Gibsons.
This one was my favorite. A little guy by the name of John Lennon. Look him up. He's a lesser well-known musician.
He was in the band named after the Bugs.
The Beatles.
The Beatitudes?
Yeah, but they're like, it's the different version of that. The Beatles. Some people call it the Beatles, but it's definitely not that. Amateurs. We're in the industry, we would know. He actually played a couple of different Epiphone hollow bodies as well.
Leonard Skinner got Ricky Medlock.
Oh, yeah.
Using Epiphone Les Pauls.
And this is my favorite, and I talked about this a minute ago. Les Paul. Interesting name for a fella who plays guitar. Maybe he invented something called the Les Paul. His original guitars and his current main axe were made with parts mostly from like the Epiphone parts.
So I can tell that you got these facts from an article that was written a few years ago.
Because he is no longer with us.
He is no longer with us.
Right.
My buddy, Jake actually is his name, and I were starting to plan a trip up to New York. He was actually still gigging up till the day he died.
I know, man.
We wanted to go see him live, and he passed away before we could make it. But yeah.
How dare him?
That jerk.
Didn't he know that you were coming up there? The Jakes were coming to New York to watch him? So he was actually playing Epiphone parts mostly in his own guitars.
Wow.
Which, he had access to whatever you needed.
Right.
And he chose those for a reason.
Yeah. Well, okay, so we were talking about a minute ago artists playing and preferring knockoffs. How about old James Hetfield? Name that band.
Metallica.
Yeah, you don't read good.
It's not even on here.
Metallica.
I just know it from memory.
Oh, wow.
I'm really good at music facts.
You don't remember good.
Metallica is.
So it's Metallica.
Oh yeah, like the t-shirts.
Like the t-shirt brand.
like the Target shirts, right?
So he plays a Chinese knockoff of a Gibson.
So why? Why do you think that is? It's like his favorite little Flying V, which is my favorite shape of a guitar.
It could be the way it sounds. You plug it in, and that's it. Like, does it sound good? Does it feel good in your hands? Like, do you, as a guitar player, and I don't know, I honestly don't know the answer to this next question. Do you break in a guitar? Like, is this something like where you start wearing off the finish on the back? Does it fit your hand differently after 10 years of use? Is it something like I've broken this one in, it fits my hand right now, or is it?
just find one that worked for them? How's that work?
Electric guitars, I would say no. I mean, sometimes the finish does wear off if, years of sweat every single night.
That makes sense.
The salt and stuff, and if you don't clean it off. But, some people actually take sandpaper to their necks because they like the way they feel.
I just watched a YouTube video of someone who did that.
Yeah.
They called it a custom finish. I'm like, it looks like you just sanded off the backside paint.
Right. But, necks are, the radius of the neck, how round it is.
If it's C-shaped or more of a D-shaped, capital D-shape maybe?
Yep. And
a little different.
And then how thick they are all affect the way it feels in your hand. And there's not one that's better than another. It just depends on what you like. And so as long as that feels good, and if you plug it in and it sounds good, it really doesn't matter who made it, where it came from, how new or old it is. All of that goes out the window the second that you realize, I love the way this feels and I love the way it sounds.
So looking at your line of guitars over there, I can see the different shapes of the necks and the roundness on the back and how I guess narrow or thick they are. What do you prefer? Tell me about your acoustic, because I can't tell what it is from this side because it's the back of it. But what kind of acoustic? What is Jake Jones, #1 Billboard charting songwriter, guitarist, singer, producer, mixer? What's your go-to acoustic over there?
Well, first of all, to back up and answer your question about the neck thicknesses, I prefer a thicker neck.
Okay.
I have pretty big hands.
Okay.
And so it just feels better in my hands. It feels easier to play. I also play I do play lead, but I play a lot more rhythm.
Sure.
And riffy kind of stuff. So anyway, but that acoustic guitar is a Fender acoustic. And it is a very special acoustic for several reasons. It was my dad's, and so I inherited that from him. But I remember when he bought it back in the 90s, I believe it's in 1994, and he spent big bucks on it. At least my 7-year-old mind, thought it was big bucks, $150.
Whoa. So nothing like top of the line just for you guys. That's how the Joneses roll.
For the record, $150 is nothing to spend on an acoustic guitar. That's cheap.
True. Yeah.
And
there are McPherson guitars you can pick up right now if you have 10 grand.
Right. Oh yeah, of course.
It just if you want to pick one up on your way home.
Yeah, oh well, I'll grab one after.
Stop by Subway, Chipotle, whatever it is, and then stop by the McPherson Guitar Company and pick up a guitar.
Drop 10 G's. No, so that's my go-to guitar. That guitar is on records circulating planet Earth right now, all over the place, on the charts.
That is my favorite planet, by the way. Out of all the planets I've been to, I'm pretty sure Earth is my favorite.
I'm surprised. There are some other planets that you've been to that I thought you might like more. No, so the guitar, it has a massive gash in the back. It came that way. So my dad got a discount. So it was $150 new. I don't know what he paid for it. And it's never been repaired. And it just sounds better with age. But that taught me a lot, which is it really, especially with acoustic guitars, more than any other kind of guitar, the sound that you get out of an acoustic guitar is the direct result of the sound bouncing around inside of the body. And so the type of wood that it's made of makes a huge difference. It does make a difference with an electric guitar for sure, but the actual resonance, the sound waves themselves are produced from within that wood. And so as it ages, as it gets older, the wood starts to get a little darker, and it starts to kind of break down.
That makes sense.
And it starts sounding sweeter. It starts sounding better.
Those vintage guitars we're talking about, like the Gibson J45 or whatever, those old Martin guitars from almost 100 years ago, have these really sweet sounds because like the pores open up in the wood. Humidity and air conditions and everything like that have to do with the wood expanding, contracting. And that definitely affects the way that the sound is absorbed or reflected inside of the body of the guitar.
I do have to say, like Willie Nelson's guitar is a great example. That thing, it's got holes in it.
It's been beat up for decades.
In 2011, we actually worked at Blackbird, and on the wall, they had this old guitar. And I made a joke when we first walked in about the guitar because it just looks like a piece of crap.
Sure.
It looks like just it's hanging on the wall for decoration.
Yeah, they got that one off Craigslist and were like, hey, let's throw that up there. $30.
I was scared to touch it. I mean, for fear that it would fall apart.
Or catch a disease.
And our producer that we worked with made the joke. He said, before we're done, I'm going to make you record something on this album with that guitar. To which I'm just thinking, oh, that's hilarious. That'd be great.
Right,
Let's
right.
do it.
Yeah. That sounds like a fun little novelty thing to do.
Sure enough, the bridge of one of our songs, he decided to throw an acoustic guitar part in it.
Just for that?
Set me up and he said, there you go, play that guitar.
Huh.
It's now, I was not expecting it to sound good, so it's not some sort of confirmation bias. I expected it to sound like garbage and had been told nothing to the contrary. So when I sat down and strummed the first chord, my mind was blown.
What happened?
It was only the tension of the strings that were even keeping the tuning pegs in place. Like the wood around them had deteriorated.
Whoa.
There were thin spots in the guitar and places where the wood was separating, and you could tell it used to be a darker brown, but was like almost black from just years of dinge and dust. 1935 Gibson.
Dude.
I don't even know what model. And poorly taken care of.
Man.
And it sounded absolutely amazing. I think it's the song Sever from the We As Human EP that came out in 2011. If you listen to that, the acoustic in that bridge is that guitar.
Those are my favorite stories to hear. Like, you weren't expecting something, but something magical happened out of it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about cheap gear. For instance, I started the story, made me stop. I was recording a band not too long after I moved to Nashville in a little studio called the Givens House. And it was a hard rock band from Alabama. They came up to work with me, and the guitarist shows up with a solid state, really inexpensive crate amp is what it was called.
Crate is like the industry butt of every guitar amp joke.
Sure. Yeah. And rightly so. They don't have a fairly widely popular sound.
I'll tell you, they're dependable.
Yeah.
The reason why it's everybody's first electric guitar amp.
They will sound the same for the next 30 years. So he came in with that, and I rolled my eyes, like to myself, obviously. And okay, I don't own a guitar amp to bring in at this point in my life, so I will do what I can to make this one work. And so this brings me to a point where does it kind of really matter what you bring in if you know how to work with what you have? I think it doesn't matter if you have the thought and the time to put into, let's make this sound good. Sometimes you physically can't. Like, I can't make hitting a broken drum head sound like that really cool snare drum that you hear on all your favorite records. Like, sometimes you just can't do that because it's not there. But with a guitar amp, you have a little bit of room to work with. You can adjust the tone and the EQ and where the microphone is and what kind of microphone you use and what kind of gear you record through. So I plugged it in. I plugged him up. I said, you just play the part over and over again, and I'm going to get in there and work with it. And that ended up being one of my favorite guitar tones I've ever gotten in the recording studio. $150 crate, solid state combo amp that this guy was playing on this hard rock record where I needed a wall of sound. And what I thought would be a little fuzzy, hissy mess ended up being one of my favorite guitar tones that I've had other colleagues ask what you used on that. And I had to kind of like swallow a little hard before I answered a crate solid state combo amp.
Well, what's great is after the fact, right? So if you told someone ahead of time, yeah, we're going to be using a crate solid state, you get laughs.
I would totally get laughed at for sure.
But then after the fact, when people are like, man, that sounds amazing. What did you use? One of my favorite things is to be like, you want to know what we used?
You want to know what we did with that?
We used a cheap, junky amp that you were just making a joke about.
Yeah. The one you were just making fun of is what I used on that one. Thank you very much.
Right. Okay. So I have one. So I joined We As Human, and when I did, I inherited a Mesa triple rectifier amp head. Now, not only are these things incredibly expensive, this one was special because it came from a certain age range in the 90s where they made them a very specific way and highly sought after by toneheads. And so I didn't completely understand the entire setup. Apparently, I misunderstood the agreement. And in 2011, the amp was actually repossessed from my possession. It was taken away.
It's a good place for it to be repossessed from.
By the owner, who I didn't even realize was the owner. I thought someone else owned it and it was on loan. Anyway, So here I am. We had actually just done Winter Jam.
A big festival in the Christian music industry.
Yeah, a big festival tour. In fact, that year it was the biggest tour in the world. We beat out Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift.
Oh, it was huge.
So big tour, used this amp, and I was not only heartbroken, I was pretty angry that the person had taken it from me, because the only other amp I owned was a $150 PV amplifier that I bought to mess around at home and practice with.
What'd you do?
So I didn't have a choice. I was broke. I was in a band.
Right.
So
I know what that means.
I loaded that amp up into the head case that I had and took it out for the next tour. So fun fact, Skillet was on tour. They were on the Winter Jam tour, and they were on the next tour as well. And their sound engineer, we were paying him to do our sound as well. So we get done with the very first show of this next tour where I'm using this cheap amp, and I'm literally so ashamed to have this cheap amp on stage that I've gone through and removed every piece of branding off of it and taken black gaff tape and taped over the name so that no one could tell what it was, because I was so ashamed.
Please tell me you used like a silver Sharpie and wrote some other brand name on there just for fun.
So I didn't, but our bassist did.
Someone actually did.
He wrote Dumble, which is, they're like $90,000, $100,000 amps. And if you turn around, right the second, Robert, behind you, it's the amp down there on the bottom. The one that
still
says
there.
Dumble, it's still there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get done with that first show, and the sound engineer, his name is Rob Taylor. He doesn't work with them anymore. He owns Taylor Trucking, which you might have heard of. But he walked up to me and shook my hand and said, "Whatever you have done to fix your tone, thank you."
Wow.
Like, what do you mean? Man, your tone was rough. And I don't know what you did, but mixing your tone today was like a hot knife through butter. It sounded so good.
Isn't that a cool compliment to have?
Got to be kidding me. In fact, Justin Forshaw, because it's so expensive and so inconvenient to try to fly a guitar amp, every show that he's done with As We Ascend, unless we were using amps provided to us by the venue, he's used that amp on stage.
Less of a risk of losing something or breaking something expensive.
It's a great amp. It sounds good. And I found out later that the band Blackstone Cherry, who, if you haven't heard of them, look them up. They're amazing, but they're probably most known for a song that they put out, but they're not known for it. Florida Georgia Line is their song, Stay. If I told you I loved you, would it make you want it? So that's their song, and Florida Georgia Line covered it. Anyway, they're out using the exact same make and model of that amp.
Dang.
And those guys are killer guitarists and a phenomenal tone.
Man. So it doesn't really matter in most cases, in some cases, exactly how much money you pour into your gear, as long as it sounds good, it is good. And I think that's a rule to live by.
So true. And in 2019, a lot of people are more apt to play a boutique knockoff of a popular amp,
right,
than the popular amp itself. You see that everywhere. In fact, my amplifier now that I use on stage and in the studio whenever I do use an amp, which we can talk about in a second, but is a Splon, which really is...
I love Splon stuff.
It's a knockoff of a Marshall.
Yeah.
A Marshall JCM 800, and then mine has a little knob on it that I can make it sound like a Marshall Plexi, which is just, I love it. I think it sounds great. And it's not because I couldn't afford a Marshall. In fact, it was probably a little more expensive than a Marshall, but it's just because it sounded good, and that's all that matters.
Right. I see here in the notes you have another story to tell. Should I let you tell it?
Yeah. I'll keep this one quick because I'm sure both of us have a million stories like this one. But what made this one special is it's really the reason I'm sitting here today. We had just moved to Nashville. I was touring with We As Human. We had a little bit of a break, and I had done recording. I mean, I had a recording studio in New Mexico, but I was closed indefinitely because I was touring.
Right.
And I just knew I was going to make so much money on tour that, I wasn't going to need to produce anyone for a long time. Insert joke. That's the joke. Insert canned laughter. You're really bad at that. Anyway.
I'm not a can.
Oh, well, you kind of look like one from here.
Thank you.
I'm not wearing my contacts.
It's my hat.
Oh, no, but I sat down. I didn't have a studio. I didn't even have a room for a studio. had my daughter by then, my oldest, Emma. She had just been born. So all my recording equipment was in the living room next to the TV. And so my buddy came to town, stayed for a few days, and we recorded 3 songs in my living room, acoustic and vocal. And then I went in on the computer and added all the other instruments. But we're going through, and at this point, I had some expensive microphones. I had some good gear, some nice stuff, and it was time for him to sing. And I stuck one of these mics in front of his face, and he started singing, and it didn't sound right.
Sure.
I couldn't get it to sound good. So I was like, well, I could fight it later, but let's just try another mic. So we grab another one, same thing, and another one, and another one. And then finally I'm like, okay, the last one, the only one we haven't tried out of it wasn't that many, but it was a few. The last one that we hadn't tried was the first microphone I ever bought. $60 condenser microphone. Condenser is just the type of microphone it is.
Sure.
$60 off of Sweetwater, I think, back in like the early 2000s. And I thought, well, just for fun, let's just see what this sounds like. So I plug it in, stick it in front of his face, and it sounds amazing. So we record his entire all 3 of his demos with this microphone. I get done and wind up letting a buddy of mine hear it who happens to be managing another artist. And he just says, wow, this sounds incredible. These recordings are amazing. I want you to work with an artist that I'm managing. And that just snowballed and turned into, all of a sudden, I was more busy working with artists than I had time to know, I didn't to do anything else.
Right,
and I quit my day job rolling burritos. And so when I wasn't on tour, I was working with bands, and it was all from these recordings that I used this super cheap equipment in my living room with.
If you can make it sound good, it's fine. And we talked about this so many times already in this podcast, but in real life and in our careers, if it sounds good, it is good. And it's funny, a couple weeks ago, an engineer hit me up and asked me to come help him get drum sounds and everything like that. And they gave me a gear list of what this huge studio had and said, what would you use on toms, on the drums? And I said, I use, and this is true, my favorite drum tom mic is the Audix D6. And I bring them with me to every session I go to because most studios don't have them. They are inexpensive in comparison to the industry standard. They're $199 each, brand new. You can get them on eBay for like $100 or whatever. And they come usually in a drum pack of mics. Like you can get the whole pack for like $500. You get a whole pack of mics and you get several of those and whatever. And so a lot of recording guys kind of look down their nose at them. And so when I said, hey, check out the D6s. I swear to you on these things. These are what you need on toms. They just sound great. And I am, just to toot my own horn, often hired because of my drum sounds and what I can do while recording drums. And I have a gold record with Kelly Clarkson for recording drums. I have worked on huge records for my drum sounds. And so I like to think that I know what I'm talking about. At least my mom says I do.
Oh no, I could speak from experience that your drum sounds are phenomenal.
Thanks, man. Here's the $5 I told you about earlier for saying that. Thank you.
This in my pocket real quick.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And then so I told him this. I'm like, hey, grab a pair of D6s or 2 or 3 of those, depending on how many toms you have, and thank me later. And he goes, well, I just hit up the studio manager, and here's a screenshot of what he said. And apparently he was not happy that he even requested those. He goes, those are live sound mics. Those are horrible pieces of junk. Whoever you're getting the information from doesn't know what they're talking about. Which just led me. I'm like, dang it, he's right. But then I told him, or he told me, he goes, then right after he sent that message, he called me and just chewed me out. And I'm like, what? This guy's off his rocker. Like, first of all, what kind of engineer, studio manager, whatever would just scold you for your suggestion on a microphone? And then apparently, you told him you're getting the information from somebody else, which maybe he didn't like that too much. I don't know. But then he called and chewed you out over it. That's ridiculous.
Say, use 421s.
So what? Yeah, that's the Nashville way to do it. I hate those. But so I did the Nashville thing and Googled him and his credits, which he has none. So just in my own head, I high-fived myself. I'm like, whatever, getting what he's talking about. Which a snooty response from my part, but whatever. And so I swear on those. First of all, I have the expensive mics. I have the 421s. I have the industry standards for toms, and I choose intentionally to use the lesser expensive ones because of the way they sound. Same with room mics. I have the Royer ribbon mics, and we had some pair of Coles, thousands of dollars a piece. And I'm using the $150 Cascade ribbon mics because the fat heads, which I love. And I think they sound better. That's just my personal preference. And apparently people keep paying me to do what I do. So someone likes it.
You found out that it's a lot of people's preference, whether they know it or
not. But sometimes does it matter what you're using gear wise if you don't have a big enough studio or the cool enough studio to record at anyway? Does it really matter? Like, okay, cool. You're using $150 room mics or $100 Tom mics, but you still have to go rent the huge ceilinged, wood floored, professionally treated recording studio, right? Or it won't sound good. Is that true?
Right. It's impossible to get a good sound of anything unless you're paying at least $1,500 a day to be somewhere.
And that's if you bring your own engineer. So
right, because if you take that and break it down to dollar bills and then staple them to the walls, it really helps with the sound diffusion.
It does.
That's all I can figure out anyway.
That's the only thing I can think of. That they have the walls full.
Of course not. I think we've established at this point in the podcast that definitely is not the case. Now I will say that's not to say that, especially with drums, where you want to rely on a lot of the room, that having a nice room,
big open room,
isn't going to aid a lot.
It's true.
But also, that being said,
no, those big studios sound great, mind you.
You have more of this proof of how it does not take a big, nice studio to get big, nice sounds.
Yeah, that Kelly Clarkson record that I did, the drums on was recorded in a room smaller than a bedroom. An average size bedroom here in the United States is about 10 by 10, 10 feet by 10 feet. I don't know what that is in metrics. So something meters by something meters. 3.25 meter. I don't know. Something like that.
Yeah, about three.
Three meters by 3 meters. Let's just call it that. So this room was smaller than that and was previously an accountant's office. Literally still had a file cabinet hanging from one of the walls. I treated it a little bit. I put up some sound diffusion and absorption in the room to keep it from being too reverby or echoey, and to manage with it. But I knew what I'm doing with the microphones I have. I know what I'm doing with the size room I have and the reflections. And I recorded the drums in a very small room, not a huge. It had carpet too, like little thin, accountant room carpet.
The Berber. What it's called.
Yeah, yes.
From my vacuum cleaner days. I used to sell vacuum cleaners door to door. It's a true story. It's actually how I bought that Epiphone Les Paul rabbit trail over.
Man, those are good vacuums. I have one.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, those are good things. So I do know from firsthand experience that it does not take a huge room to record, to get your good sounds. I love the huge room sound, and you can play with more mics and put them in different places. But if you only have a small room, use what you got. Use your knowledge, make do with it, put some couch cushions against the wall, and be done with it. It's doable, and I want to encourage you to make art with what you have, not with what you wish you had.
Well, and this is a little off topic, but if you really need that drum room sound and you don't have a good room, kill the room with blankets and mattresses or couch pillows or whatever you have. It really doesn't matter. And then just use a computer plug-in to kind of help with that room sound.
Yeah,
if that's what you need. Or if you have really bizarre rooms or really weird sounds that some might call bad, use it to your advantage.
Experiment with it.
And maybe create a new sound around it.
And if you're not a musician at all and this has nothing to do with you, just know that maybe some of the stuff you've heard on the radio wasn't recorded in those studios you've seen in the movies and the TV shows. And most likely probably wasn't.
My mind was blown. The way they're doing drums a lot these days, and I didn't know this until I heard, it might have been Shinedown talking about it. What they're doing a lot now is, they'll mic up the whole drum kit, but they're only using what's coming through the two overhead microphones. Everything else is getting triggered and sampled
replaced.
By drum samples that were recorded in big studios,
right?
Somewhere else, and then replaced. In fact, I'm not going to say their names, but I guarantee 99.9% of everyone listening to this, a big band whose last record came out a couple of years ago, Their drummer went into the studio and simply hit the drums a bunch of times to record the samples, and then went home. And the entire record was made just using those drum samples instead of having the drummer play the parts.
That happens very frequently.
And it's I say if the band doesn't care, if they're not looking for the experience, and you're a good enough producer and engineer to know how to really make that sound good, the purists are going to say, well, it's not, you can't get a good sound because you're missing the human element. I guess it all comes down to, did anyone like it? Did anyone buy it? Did it sound good?
Yeah. What's your level of success measured by? If you're happy with it, you're successful and you did it. If you sold 1,000 records and that was your goal, who cares?
I guess the other question too is, if they had played it all together, or instead did it the way they did it, would anyone even have known the difference at all? Even maybe subconsciously been like, I don't know, something about this is better than that.
I don't know.
I think not, because I know that drums, our affinity for music, especially rock music these days, is we want things to be very tight, very precise. And as
human element being thrown in there, just the way that humans are, there's imperfection. So I don't think it can be as tight playing live all at once.
Especially metal or stuff that's really, really fast.
Fast and intricate, yeah.
Well,
I agree with you on that.
I just told that story about using my living room. And that wasn't the first time. In fact, that was my friend that I recorded. And then the artist I wound up working with right after that, based on those recordings by my friend, I was still in my living room. That's where we tracked the vocals, right in front of the TV and the couch. And that artist brought in a friend of hers, just who was in town visiting, and sat on my couch while we recorded and kind of hung out. And she enjoyed the vibe and the way I worked with this artist so much that she hired me to do a full project. And it was all in my living room. And I was embarrassed. I'm like, sorry guys, my living room. I tried to get all the dishes done.
Struggle's real.
And it was a tiny little downstairs apartment. It wasn't like a nice big living room in a house. It was a tiny downstairs apartment living room.
Like, I've had the same feeling in all of my recording studios that I've ever owned or co-owned or whatever over the last 15 years. It's not one like the ones you see in the movie. And there are not that many like those. There are not that many huge first-class facilities that you see in the film industry. And so most of them are in houses or wings of houses or little outhouses behind the houses, or accountants' buildings or taxidermists or whatever it may be. And so I've always had, out of the 5 studios I've owned so far, 6 maybe, that every time someone comes in, a client, and that I just feel like they're just looking around, like their eyes are just scanning the room, and they're just nitpicking it because like, oh, this isn't what I thought it would be.
This is what I saw in that one movie that one time.
Right, or in your Instagram photos, when I've seen you working with this band in this huge console. Like, where's all that? I thought that's what I was getting. Because they don't know that the gear that we have, Jake, you and I, in our studios, we know how to use it. We know the ins and outs of it. We know what it can do, what it can't do. We know how to get what we want out of it. And so when we know that these artists are coming in, we have it prepped and set up, and we already have a game plan in mind, sometimes on paper, of what we're going to route everything through and how it's all going to work and how it's all going to play out and what it's going to sound like at the end before we even hit the first note. And so when these bands come in, or these artists come in, and I'm feeling judged, I'm just wondering, I'm a thinker, I'm an overthinker. I'm like, oh man, they're just taking all this in and going, oh man, why isn't this bigger? Why don't they have this huge console? Where's all the things? Where are the buttons and knobs? And why doesn't it look like an airplane? I'm thinking all this, and they might be thinking all this too, but maybe they're not. And then I think once they fall in, like, okay, wait, this guy's got the credits, or this guy knows what he's doing. This is why our label hired him. This is why we're here. Let's just see what happens. And usually 99.9% of the time, they're like, oh man, it doesn't matter what you have or where you have it. And a lot of times I have the same gear that the big studios do, maybe even better taken care of because I have pride in my stuff rather than an intern who doesn't care to clean the gear or upkeep it. And at the end of the day, they get a record that sounds great. I say at the end of the day, figuratively, at the end of the day, you don't get a record that sounds great. It takes days and weeks. Anyway, but one time, Jake, a band came into my studio and they had a band meeting and came back after dinner and said, I think we're going to leave. I'm like, what happened? And it wasn't me that brought the band in. It was a guy who wanted to co-produce it with me. It was his project, and he kind of sold me as being like the name on the project. And it's like, come in, we're going to do this with Robert Venable, blah, blah, blah. They show up, they look around, they did a little scanning of the room. I'm like, this is not going to end up well. And they had the band meeting, came back and said, we're going to leave because it doesn't look like the pictures. I'm like, what pictures? I didn't see anybody pictures of my studio. And all my Instagram stuff, you scroll through there, it looks just like the pictures of my studio.
Right.
Like, what's your problem? They're like, well, we went to the website, which was 10 years old for my previous studio, and they didn't see the same wall or the same console or the same gear. I had more gear at the time, which is funny. I just didn't have the same console because I never used it. It just held my keyboard up. And so they left and said, this isn't for us. We wanted to work at the studio. I'm like, oh, you just wanted to work in a different environment. You wanted to work in a place that looked different.
We wanted a nice big console for Instagram pictures.
Right. Like, how are we going to post videos of this? You just have a regular desk with tons of gear on it rather than buttons and knobs and faders. That's weird.
Well, I think a lot. Two as well. I was two.
T-O-O.
T-O-O. A lot of artists have no idea what that does. They don't understand at all. And why would they?
Right.
It's not their job to know. But the truth is, yeah, it's what used to take up tons of space, 10, 15, 20 feet of faders and knobs and all that, now is just on a computer. It's all the same.
Right.
It's just digitized. And the thing is, even the big money makers that have been doing it for 20, 30 years for all the biggest artists in the entire world that are recording and mixing all these massive records, they're all making the switch over to computer software versions of what they have. And the reason is it's cheaper. And it's not just cheaper to buy, it's cheaper to maintain because you don't have to maintain it.
And you don't have to pay the electric bill. Literally $800 to $1,000 a month to keep an SSL console on with the old power rig. I'm not going to get into details about that. You're paying an extra house payment just to keep the power on a console.
Wow.
Ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. It's it doesn't make economical sense to keep that stuff around. Now there are quirks of, just like with a certain instrument, I've got this Fender. I could play the same acoustic guitar made the same year and it could sound like garbage. Those old consoles had little things that were a little different about every one of them.
Right.
So maybe there was a couple of channels on it that just had that extra piece of magic that just sounded different from all the other channels.
Maybe.
But
I mean, don't get me wrong. They're fun to play with. I love playing on the consoles. And sometimes you need it. If you need, 48 something channels of preamps because you're recording 6 people live in the studio. I've had to do that. I've maxed it out. I needed all that gear. I've recorded in studios that have done that, which I couldn't do in my own.
How many channels did you use for the 21 Pilots Mute Math sessions?
48.
Goodness gracious.
48 channels maxed out, and I ran out. I ran out of channels. I needed more. So I summed some things to single channels or stereo pair because I needed to send stuff for video for that project as well.
I cannot imagine trying to juggle that many channels all at once.
So I had all 48 on the API console, plus some outboard gear going on with compression and some effects channels. And then still didn't have enough for what I wanted to do. But I had 2 drummers, so 2 whole drum sets, 2 keys players, a guitarist, and the singer, obviously. But 3 people were singing. So all sorts of stuff. There's stuff going on. 6 players total.
So we've dropped some names during this episode, talking about Fender, Marshall, Gibson, Martin. I could keep going. Takamine. And the thing is, what makes an American Stratocaster better than a Korean Stratocaster? And other than maybe some slightly better parts, and I would argue that, you're paying for the name. You're paying for the headstock to say made in America, made in the USA.
Yeah, same with recording gear too. You're paying for the name of... So Universal Audio or Uri makes the 1176 gear, which is a compressor. It's called the 1176. But then there's also like Warm Audio, which makes the same thing for $400 or $500 instead of, $50 $1,500 or $2,000.
And I love that it's a trend now to prefer the less expensive gear.
I mean, I love it.
Right?
I go for it.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah. If it sounds good, I'm good with it.
And, I don't know. I haven't spent enough time around both of them together to say that I would know a difference. But even if it is some sort of confirmation bias, it's a great one to have, right? Like, no, all the expensive ones are better. That's terrible, but it's something that we do a lot as human beings because we worked harder to be able to, for a longer period of time, to be able to save up the money to buy that piece of gear. So you better believe we're going to like it a lot better.
And a lot of that more expensive gear might be vintage or something. It might be dirtier sounding. It might be actually worse sounding than the newer stuff, but that might be what people prefer. So it might be, in some cases, worth the extra thousands of dollars for some kind of piece of gear to make it sound crappier. Sorry, Mom. For the than the newer, cleaner gear.
Chris Ordalgi talks about spending thousands of dollars. Famed mix engineer.
Yeah.
Name any massively successful artist over the last 20 years. 25
Pick a song.
Years.
Throw a dart at it.
He talks about spending thousands of dollars just to maintain his 1176 compressors and how relieved he was that the company Waves came to him and said, "Hey, can we take this thing apart and see how it works so that we can make a software version of it?" So they picked his favorite one, the one that he used the most because it had the most character and quality that he liked. And now you can have 20 of that one compressor on your session, on everything.
Yeah.
And for a heck of a lot cheaper.
Dude, I use that stuff too. It's good.
But yeah, brand names, man. It's that's a lot of what you're paying for
and
whenever you're...
It's the same with anything, like the clothing lines and the purses and the shoes. Yes, there's quality product that they're putting out. If it's worth to you knowing that you have that name on the gear or on the clothes or on the whatever you're buying, then good. Maybe it's better for you. And if you don't care, I'm not a brand name person. I actually prefer not to wear any brand names on my clothing. With gear stuff, it looks good on paper to your clients. They go, "Do you have a Neumann microphone?" I do. Like, okay, we're going to work with you then, because that's what they think. If they Google the best microphones, and if your producer of choice doesn't have that, then they might not be a good producer. So like there's some stuff I have literally just for that reason, because people are stupid, or I guess I should say ignorant to the fact that it doesn't matter sometimes.
Right.
And even having the Neumann U87 microphone that people love to use, I had a $150 clone of that, which I still prefer to use to that Neumann.
Well, and there's a whole philosophical, psychological side to that as well. And, is it worth paying $8,000 for a microphone, even if you never use it, because you'll generate more than $8,000 worth of work just by simply owning it.
Yeah.
But, again, right behind you there, we had a ton of demo tracking sessions this week.
Yeah.
And the microphone that I left up all week is my Aventone C12. Aventone is known for making clone
replicas
equipment. And so it's based on the AKG C12.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Aventone CV12 is what this one is, CV12. And then so AKG makes a C12, very expensive, very sought after microphone, great microphone, but loads and loads of money. And this Aventone mic has a nickname, which is the Taylor Swift mic, because I don't know about her last couple records. I have no idea. But I know that for her records up to that point for sure, and maybe these last two, I don't know, it was her mic of choice. It sounded best with her voice. Mm-hmm. And it's an incredible sounding microphone. I paid $150 plus an old pedal board that I traded for it.
Dang, man.
And that
what a
mic
steal.
Sounds amazing. It sounds good on almost everything.
It sounds great.
And that and the mic I'm talking into right now are my two most used microphones for vocals.
I love these mics that we have right now. This is the Shure SM7B. This is our podcast mic of choice, but also my rock vocal song microphone of choice and my hi-hat mic of choice.
It can take a licking and keep on ticking.
Yeah, and sometimes it does tick. It makes a weird noise. Just kidding. I think that's our system. I'm done. I'm done talking about this. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think we kind of put this one to death, right?
We did kick a dead horse with this one.
It doesn't take big bricks of gold to have the most amazing sounding recordings, especially not in 2019. Every single year after year, they're coming out with better and better and better software. Before we started recording, we were just talking about, how when solid state technology came out, it was all the rage, and then it quickly turned into the worst thing you could ever do. If you instantly wanted to lose a record deal, walk in with a Crate 212. That happened to me. True story. Record company told me maybe I should pray about the rest of my life and whether or not I should be a musician.
Did you ever do that?
Yeah, it really happened.
Did you ever pray about it?
Yeah, I did.
What did you decide to do?
Well, I think, I listened to God, and he told me that maybe I should get into wicker bowl making.
Does he have a voice like Morgan Freeman?
He does.
That's
Wait,
cool.
Never mind. That was Morgan Freeman that told me that. Sorry.
Oh, got you.
I get confused.
They're like twins, really.
Super similar. Super similar.
Hard to tell apart. Depends on the lighting.
No, but it's it doesn't. You just don't need all of that.
That's where I landed on with this, is that you don't need all the name brand things. You don't need all the big things. You don't need the expensive things. You don't need the huge roof studios to make a killer record. And we just named a whole bunch of records that were done in small spaces, spaces that are very close to you. If you have a basement, maybe you're in a basement or garage. And if you're trapped in a basement or garage, please let us know. And we can send help. But Morgan Freeman, please help these guys. And then
You're confused now.
Yeah, I'm getting them all confused. You don't need that stuff. Obviously, the stuff is great. The stuff is there. It's priced for what it is for a reason. It's worth it. However, you don't need it.
I mean, I'll say I didn't want anyone to know that I didn't have nice outboard gear and that I didn't have a console and that I didn't have really expensive amplifiers. I mean, now, most of all the guitar work you hear, for real, almost all of it is off of a computer software program that was given to me through the company IK Multimedia, Amplitude.
Good stuff.
I can't tell you how many records have been made through that.
And I'm using all mine through a Kemper, which is an emulator. It's basically just replicating the sound of all these big expensive amps just in one single unit using the software on board there. And bands are touring with that live on stage too. And
no one can tell the difference.
Nope.
Record companies can't tell. The fans can't tell. And at the end of the day, if everyone listens to it and says, "Man, that's good tone. How did you get that tone?" Then what does it matter what you used? Right. It doesn't. It doesn't matter if it's a flute with a grasshopper wedged in the end
through a toaster.
Right.
Which is one of our secret weapons.
If it sounds amazing, it is amazing. Period. And so, but what I was saying though was just I kept my mouth shut about my lack of expensive gear for a long time until I started having success, and that was when I felt like I can be a campaigner of hey, you don't have to have expensive gear to be successful. Look at me. I don't have a lot of expensive gear, and I've been successful. The flip side of that, and it's another podcast for another day, but there is, as a creator, there's a bit of psychology involved in owning an expensive piece of gear, because the truth is, it can inspire you to create at a moment where you may not have created, in which case you might come up with something amazing and that might inspire other people, that might change the world. You never know. And so owning that expensive piece of gear is more for your benefit and no one else's. But it will by default benefit other people and has nothing to do with whether it sounds better or not, and more to do with just does it get you into a mindset of doing more? Almost like the placebo effect. Completely like the placebo effect, which is next week. No, it's not. I'm just kidding.
Which is what we have time for next week. So we talked about right before the podcast. What if you were handed a guitar and said, this is a $200,000 guitar played by Jimi Hendrix. We restrung it for a right-handed player. And you can play this on this record. In contrast to, here, hold this $80 guitar real quick, play it with whatever you want to. Would you play them any differently? I think you would. I think subconsciously, maybe even consciously, you would play something different. You would hold it differently, maybe not as tight or maybe tighter. The pick might be just tighter because of nerves or something. I don't know. But I think you might get a different outcome based off of just what's in the back of your brain hole going, oh man, I'm playing a $200,000 guitar instead of my normal, $400 one, or instead of that $50, $80, $90 one that someone just handed me a second ago.
When the truth is,
it might not sound any different at all.
Jimi Hendrix's guitar
That's true.
was a cheap piece of junk.
But in your brain, if you think maybe this is more expensive, maybe you think this sounds better.
Oh, one I forgot to mention.
Go.
Stevie Ray Vaughan, my favorite guitarist in the whole wide world.
Oh yeah, we didn't even touch on that.
His guitars, his number one, the one that he's most famous for,
His go-to.
Pawn Shop. The song, he had a guitar named Lenny after his wife, which is, he wrote a song named Lenny after the same wife on that guitar named Lenny.
Oh.
Fender did a reissue of it a few years ago. This artist series where they like literally used the same brand of cigarette he smoked to burn the same cigarette marks in the back of the headstock. Anyway, again, another pawn shop buy, and the guy changed the way we think of blues guitar forever. I mean, he was prolific. Tons of stories just like that. It just doesn't take the most expensive, nicest American-made blah 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 blah. Zach Myers, Shinedown, his signature guitar is an SE.
That's right.
And he plays at every show.
Right. That's true. And you can pick that up for just a handful of $100 rather than a handful of thousands. We need to give a shout out to some of our patrons.
Yeah. Oh, I want to start.
Okay, go for it.
A huge thank you to MD Biacco. Dang it.
It's Biacco.
Biacco.
Why can't you get his name right?
Drew.
Dr. Biacco.
I'm sorry, brother. I was just with him last weekend, finishing up a vocal session for an EP they have coming out very soon.
We have some other cool people like Samantha Seeger.
What up, Sam?
Our buddy Rob and XOB Cry. I'm just kind of shooting here from the hip. Davin C. Casey. Let's go with Michael J83.
Jennifer Walter, who had the notes to this episode before it ever even came out, so she was not surprised by any of this.
Executive producers.
Yep.
And she's hung out with us a couple times in the studio.
So, Robert, I am currently not an executive producer.
And you never will be, Jake.
I could be.
Oh.
How do I do that?
If you went to turneduppodcast.com and then you scrolled over with your mouse to the top right-hand corner and clicked the little button on the left side of the mouse on the little link that says become a patron. And then you can follow the instructions, choose how much you would like to help us out with on our show, and or instead of choosing how much you want to help us out with, choose what you want from us. Like, do you want to be on the show? Do you want a mug? Do you want a sticker? What do you want? And then money will just come out of your account magically to help us make the podcast, and then you'll get that in the mail.
And now, just to clear it up for our listener here, for the one,
if you're still there,
is it a real mouse?
It is not a real mouse.
Not like the animal mouse.
Not today. This is an artificial mouse, and it is made of plastic.
Okay, so
and
plastic mouse, not a real mouse.
It's a computer term.
Okay,
I would tell you to Google it, but I don't think you can.
Now, what if
without a mouse?
Put a mouse on my touchpad and move it around?
That would be fun to watch.
Would it work the same?
Let's find out next week on things Jake doesn't know how to do.
When we're with Jen and Mel of
your BFF podcast. It's
your BFF pod, which is that's funny. That's their social media handle.
I only speak in social media handles.
And I'm like, Music City Mel. Melissa, if you're listening to this, that is exactly how you're saved in my phone.
That's why I have it saved as Music City Mel, one word.
And I'm sure she'll bring up what I'm saved as in her phone because it's hilarious.
We're doing a joint episode for this next week. So if you have any questions, if you're hearing this on the day this podcast airs or within a couple of days.
April 1st, and this is not a joke.
Yes, this is not a fool's joke. A couple of fools telling a joke, maybe. Just shoot us any kind of questions you want to know about love, life. I'm trying to think of other L words. Laughter, lullabies, ladybugs.
Lollipops.
Limericks. Oh, it's your turn. You have to throw something out. We go back and forth.
Corn dogs.
Right. Oh. And you're kicked out of the podcast. But we're doing kind of like a love line thing. Like if you've ever listened to the show Love Line with Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla, they used to call in, ask questions about love and life and stuff. We're not going to get too graphic or anything because we have a clean rating. We like to keep it that way. But we're doing a joint podcast with them and they want to know our opinion on subjects, but they need your questions. So shoot them over to us at facebook.com/Turned Up Podcast
or
Twitter or Instagram, one of my favorites,
at Turned Up Podcast.
Or you can email us. If you can find that on any of our social medias, just see the little button that says email us. Because I think, or what are we going with our email address? It's turneduppodcast@gmail.com, right?
I believe that's the one.
I think that's it. Email it, and if it's not us, then say hi to whoever answers. It's like prank calling somebody, but email.
I think you can email us through our website, which is turneduppodcast.com.
Yeah, hit us up.
And thank you. Thank you for listening and for giving us your undivided attention.
Or slightly divided attention. Because if you're driving, you have to pay attention to the road.
Or vacuuming or
cooking dinner,
doing dishes.
Putting the kids to bed.
Taking a shower. Dishes and shower are the 2 times I listen to podcasts the most.
I do dishes while I'm in the shower because I think that accomplishes a lot of things, like saving the earth by using less water.
I just had somebody tell me about drinking beer in the shower.
That's disgusting.
They called it a shower beer, and they were talking about it like it was the most amazing thing that's ever happened to them in their entire life.
I feel like that would be horrible.
That's what I imagine.
I don't like being hot. And so if I were hot and then trying to drink alcohol or something, I don't think that'd end up well.
Yeah.
And it's not my thing.
Shower beers.
And I'm good. I just do shower shampoo.
#shower beer.
I don't drink the shampoo. I just use it.
I don't know. You've been acting a little strange. I think maybe you have been drinking the shampoo.
Robert, you've been sniffing the Suave lately? You Suave sniffer.
And on that note, huge shout out to Real Sound for giving us this platform. Love you, Robert.
Oh, man. Love you, Jake.
Who edited this podcast. And I love Jake.
I love Lamp.
For sitting here. And Robert, are you just naming random things and saying you love them? Until next week.
This is Nashville signing out.
Peace.